Good. So I'm Chris Miller. I joined Talend last June to set up a public sector practice. Who here is familiar with Talend? A handful. So very briefly, Talend is probably the UK's leading supplier of open source data and information management solutions, especially for the public sector, where we have so many customers. I don't know who they are because a lot of them use open source. In fact, we have one customer, at least one customer here that I know, who started off using an open source solution. It liked it so much they ended up buying the commercial version. So, despite what my management would like me to say, I refer to what we do as plumbing and cleaning. Yeah? Before you can use data, you've got to move it around, you've got to make sure it's fit for purpose. So there's not a lot sexy about Talend, but it's very effective. How many of you are involved or aware of your organisation strategy for GDPR? Not very many, please hands. Okay, so in that case I hope that you'll get some benefit from this. One of the things that I believe about GDPR is even if you're not involved in it, you will be affected by it and you will actually be involved in it. So I'll just, for those that are not involved and not aware, how many are aware of what GDPR is? Okay, good. Right. So why should we care about it? You may not have global revenues, but you have revenues. You can get fined for this. And that's up to 4% per breach. There's going to be a lot of data protection officers around. 75,000 is the current estimate globally. So they're going to be quite scarce, I would have thought, especially in this country, and probably more so in the public sector. So for those who know where they are, how many are in the 97% that have yet to start planning? So you're already quite advanced. And for those who don't know, you don't know. One thing that I see in this is that it is about data protection, and no matter what we do, despite the fact it's an enterprise issue, IT is going to bear the brunt of it. Who's involved in IT delivery here? Okay, that's going to affect you. So a helicopter view of what we're doing with GDPR. First thing is you've got to identify. GDPR is about personal identification information, or personally identification information, PII. It's a lot quicker. First thing you've got to do is you've got to identify, know and track your PII. You've got to identify it now from a number of sources. Anybody give me a rough figure for the number of applications you've got that might have PII in it? Is it 10, 20, 30?
I think we're happy to 2.
Okay, so you've got, that's a big job there then, isn't it? Okay. Once you've identified that data, you've got to make sure that it's compliant with the requirements of GDPR. So you've got lots of different sources, you've got lots of different data. That's going to take a lot of reconciliation between the policies and the actual state of the data. Once you've done that, you've got to protect the data. Now, I'm not talking, yes, you need to protect it with the security, virus software and things like that, but just to put this in perspective, HMRC on average sack 164 people a year for looking at data they shouldn't have access to. Okay? So the issue is not just the threat from outside, it's people making illicit use of data from the inside. So you have to protect the data from that perspective as well. Once you've done that, one of the requirements of DII is that, GDPR, is that you've got to make that available. Anybody familiar with the term subject access request? Yeah. So the Information Commissioner's Office, the current guardians of our data protection, talk about a data owner, a data processor, and a data subject. So under GDPR, I have the right to go to any organisation and say, please provide me all the data that you have on me. Yeah? Now what we're talking about here, clearly this is taking application data and it's going to put it, you have got a separate issue to do with emails and even notebooks, physical paper books like this. But you still have to provide that. And GDPR recommends, or the guidance you get for this recommends it's made electronically available to the outside world. So some of the technical issues you've got there include being able to publish it. How do you protect the data? How do I validate that Chris Miller that is asking for the information is actually the same Chris Miller? Yeah? There are lots of issues. In 20 minutes, I'm not going to give you all the answers. So what I want to do is give you some practical steps to consider going forward. So if you're at the start of this process, this is just a very basic plan. This is not rocket science. You've got to start assessing your capabilities. And that assessment has got to be based on what you have, what you need, and what you think can help. I'd like to explore that a little bit further. Okay, technical capabilities. So identifying PII. I've got all these different sources, potentially 200 sources. I don't know where that data is. I don't even necessarily know what construct that's going to be, because there are obvious things like my name, my address, my national insurance number, but is there a way of deriving PII from aggregating data elements from different sources? It's quite probable that there is, and especially when you're looking across multiple sources. So how are we going to go about doing this? I would imagine, who would agree that you probably start looking at the documentation of your systems? Yeah. Let's look at what fields are being held in which application, where the tables are, etc. You probably have a few workshops. Problem with looking at documentation, how many people are confident that that documentation is up to date? Tends to be a snapshot of time, very easily out of date. And as soon as you make an assumption based on that data, you're running the risk of a data breach. Workshops, we've got less than a year. We've got the holiday season coming up. Are we actually going to be able to get through this in time? Probably not. I'm not selling this to you, but there are technologies out there that will enable you to gain a lot of ground. So there's metadata management technology. We happen to have one that enables you to automatically harvest the metadata from the systems. So it may not give you 100%, in some cases it will, it may only give you 80%, but that's your head start. This technology has the ability, it has semantic discovery, so you can say, right, that's what we class as a name, so show me where else I've got name. That's a national insurance number, show me where else I've got national insurance number. That's an email address. Yeah? So it has the ability to automatically do this. And this is going to give you a snapshot of today, but hey, that's a live technology. As your systems evolve over time, we said earlier, you've got to identify, know, and track your data. We're not just talking about data you've got now, we're talking about data you're going to gather over the next few years. So this technology will be useful to you going forward. Anybody got any idea of budget scales for GDPR? I know I'm asking a lot of people who said they don't know a lot about GDPR. It's going to cost a lot of money, okay? What I'm concerned about is making sure that what money's spent has got some longevity to it, or some value, ongoing value to it. Okay, further technical capability. How do we protect this data? So as I said earlier, yes, there are lots of technologies out there that will hopefully defeat the ransomware, the malware, the people coming in and snooping and phishing and all that sort of stuff. But we've still got to protect the data from internal, from the inside. Okay? This happens to be another one of our applications, and I'm genuinely not selling this to you. This is a technology called data prep. Now, data prep is a tool. As you can see, it's very simple. It looks a little bit like Excel, but this tool gives you the ability to mask data, to anonymize the data. In this instance, and I'm sorry about the graphics, but this says email, and that's clearly masked all the email data. A business person is able to do that. So start thinking, as I'm going to go on a little bit later, about who's actually going to be doing the work. Yeah. This tool will not only provide the user the ability to create that mask, but it also provides the ability to automate the operationalization of what that user's just done. Okay. Everybody happy with the tone and the thread of this? Is this useful? So let's talk about data integration. We said earlier that you've got to get that data centrally. I doubt very much whether anybody's going to say, I'd like to make a subject access request, can you give me access to all 200 systems? You're probably not going to want to do that. So you are going to consolidate it. How many people, this is SQL code, how many of you, is that your first point of call when you're talking about data integration? Many? I know there's one customer here, so I know that they would be doing it. But how many of you experienced that? Okay. What's the issue with this? As you can see, there's a lot of it. It requires skills. You know, as GDPR really picks up momentum in this country, those skills are going to become more scarce. Therefore, they're going to become more expensive and less available to the public sector. So, would you rather have this situation, which requires a lot of skill, is potentially prone to error, is very rigid, it's inflexible, so as your requirements change over time, you've got to go in and every time you update this, it's going to be risky? Or would you like a very fancy graphical interface that provides you with components to automate the generation of that? So rather than write that code, you're configuring different components to process data, which means that it's very easily adapted, because you can drag another component in or change the configuration of an already existing component. So these are the things that I'd just like you to think about, because we're probably going to be, in terms of technical resource, the skills, how many can relate to that? I was with a customer yesterday, 5 people in what they do, and they're core to all data integration. How many of you are going to be in that position? You'd like to be there. Public sector, who can give me a percentage of cuts to the public sector over the last 10 years? It's about 50% in terms of number of people employed by the public sector. So we are naturally in that area, so what we've got to do is find ways of getting as much production, or productivity and efficiency out of that resource. That's not going to be achieved by highly skilled manual activities. So, data protection officers, 75,000 of them required, not very many. I'm talking to a lot of organisations who are actually outsourcing this or providing outsourced services for this. And why not? Actually, it's a very sensible thing to do, because data protection is data protection, whether I'm doing it for Leeds Council, whether I'm doing it for Unilever, it's essentially the same thing. These make me laugh. Can you see that clearly? The next one takes a little bit more reading, and I'll let you have a look at that. I suggest that that's a very common one. On the right. So, you've got your data protection officer, and the data protection officer, I would imagine, in the public sector, 60 or 70% at least will be from within, so they're going to have a fairly good start. They're going to know how to navigate the organisation, albeit they won't necessarily know how to navigate the data. So what other resources do we need? So ultimately, the DPO has come up with all these books of regulations. Simplistically put, I've got to take that data and I've got to take that information, all those regulations, and reconcile that, or reconcile my data against that. Okay? So, we've got one data protection officer. Is he going to have a big team? Probably not. And even if he does, let's look at the diversity of data. There's just 4. Organisations have got a lot more. So how is that reconciliation going to be achieved? You've got less than 12 months. And part of what you've got to do, the reason I say you've got less than 12 months is it's not just about being compliant, it's being able to evidence that you're compliant, and more importantly, how you become compliant. So you've got a testing phase before the deadline comes in. Reality, very few, if any, organisations will be compliant. So what you've then got to do is provide yourself with a defensible position. In the event of a breach, you've got to be able to show what you have done to mitigate that risk. The less you've done, the bigger the fine. The more you've done, the less the fine. Listen. So going back to this, he's come up with these rules. How are we going to achieve that reconciliation? Well, clearly we're going to need key people. I love clip art, key people around here. But what's really important about this? We said earlier that PII can be derived by aggregating different elements of data. Who's likely to know what components of data could construct PII? And probably the people who work in HR, the people who work in council tax or social services, the people who actually understand the data. Yeah? And what are we doing? If we are using these people, we're now creating a pool of resources, latent, subject matter expertise. One of the fringe benefits or the side benefits of going through GDPR is people, when they start looking at data, they will start to find data issues that are already causing pain that they knew nothing about. Yeah? And it's not actually the data, it's the impact of bad data. These people know what bad data looks like and how it affects downstream processes. So, options, and I'm going to try and speed up a little bit. How do we get these people to do that reconciliation? Are we going to sit them down? There you go, there's a book of rules, there's your screen, go through record by record. Pretty impractical, I think. There's no audit of it, there's a risk of error. One of the things that GDPR requires is that you delete data that's not being used for the purposes it was originally gathered, because you shouldn't have it. Yeah? So if you start setting people down and looking at data, there's a risk they could delete the wrong data. Yeah? You could go about saying, here's a massive great spreadsheet. Go through and highlight with your highlighter. But even then, you're creating the manual ETL and associated effort to do that. It's pretty impractical. There are automated solutions, I alluded to earlier, I'll show you again in a moment, that will enable you to look at data and identify the high-level issues. So I've just seen, here's email addresses. Let's scramble the, let's mask the email addresses. Here's national insurance number, let's mask the national insurance number. But apply that throughout the data set. Okay? More importantly, this is critical. We don't want data users to change data without them being monitored, without their actions being reviewed, without having an audit trail. So the technology I gave to you earlier, which is the same technology, what this tool does is it enables the user to generate the data that they understand. It meets requirements. They can see, I've looked at that regulation, it says that an email address must be masked. Next I might mask these bits, I might mask national insurance number, but I can see the output. But I've not actually changed the data in the source. What I've done is I've created a recipe. The tool has recorded a recipe that is then given to the DPO and the IT team who can look at the recipe to make sure it doesn't conflict with any of the governance requirements. More importantly, however, bearing in mind that we've got very few IT resources, to operationalise that, to generate the code that affects those changes on the source system, the IT team simply switch a switch. The tool will generate the code and apply it. Okay? You've got rollback capability, obviously, but that's an example of where you've used non-IT staff to do IT things. Yeah? And you've also done, what you've also done is you've created that bridge between IT and the business. Bear in mind that they are going to find other issues. They're going to be grateful for doing this, because oh crikey, I didn't know I was doing that all this time. Terrible. Okay, and I'm wrapping up. So, Camden Council, they're here, they're there. So this is an interesting story. Camden gains benefits from MDM. Wow. So we talked about consolidated data. Some refer to it as a data lake. Some refer to you could do MDM, yeah, as an option. And the only way you'll find both is to look at the data, is to understand the data, is to write tracks in the data that flag when something's gone wrong. When do you want to know that you've just given somebody an overdose or about to give somebody an overdose of a drug in the NHS? Before you do it or when they've just dropped dead? Yeah? Our technology enables you to do that, but that's just one example. Let's talk about how they came to this. So, fairly self-explanatory. I'm sure these slides will go out, so I hope this is useful to you. Yeah. They saved £23 million more by, oh, actually, look, data integration of 16 core IT systems. That's brilliant. So there is some operational benefit to it. It's all about savings. We looked at matching data. It's a nice complex thing to do if anybody's ever tried to do it manually. Yeah? And we've added value to it. And that's really useful too. Yeah? And by cross-referencing different data sets, we've improved the data quality. Yeah? If your data is not fit for purpose, if it's inaccurate, it doesn't matter how good your analytics are, you're going to come up with bad decisions made on good analysis based on bad data. Yeah? But what's really interesting about this, and this was before our relationship with Zazie, they achieved this. This is reported on the 3rd of July. I'd say, based on these factors, they've got a hell of a head start on their GDPR compliance. If you're not already doing this, this is the sort of thing you're going to have to do. So, that's really all I wanted to say. I think we're all right for time. I'm happy to field questions. I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. So, feel free.
Are there any questions for Chris at all? Chris didn't take much, isn't it?
I'd be interested to understand how Camden generated those savings, what the savings were actually evidenced to.
I don't know the detail of that. You'd probably be able to speak to the guys at Zazie on that. What I will say, and I'll be completely upfront, they didn't use Talend they used IBM software to achieve what you can do in Talend. Why would you use Talend as opposed to IBM software? 2 reasons. About a third of the price. Probably a bit quicker to implement as well. And second, it's open source. And for those in public sector, you know the push by government digital services to go open source. I hope that was useful. I'm sorry for those that aren't involved with GDPR. Believe me, this will affect you. Thank you.